If I don't know you, my name is Melissa Mackey. I'm the director of Faith and Work Chicago, and it has been my privilege for the last 6.5 years to give leadership to the Burnham Fellowship, along with Joel Miles, who's there in the corner, and Sully Curtin, who might be jumping on late, I'm not sure. But it is, yeah, I say this, and I don't, it's not an exaggeration. This is probably my favorite thing that I do during the week, during the school year. And yeah, something that continues to shape and transform my own life and walk with the Lord. And so it's really just fun to get to share it with more people. Including this year, we've had 90 fellows go through the Burnham Fellowship program. And that has been from participants from like 23 different churches and congregations across Chicagoland. So yeah, we love the diversity of the program in terms of just different denominations, different vocations across the city. It really is one of the fun parts about doing a citywide kind of offering like this. Our time tonight is going to be pretty informational, but also pretty informal because we've got a small group. So we will definitely welcome questions and would love to hear, yeah, any feedback that you guys have, any questions you have. Joel is going to share in just a couple minutes, we kind of call it Why Burnham, just a little bit of background to give you some context for the, you know what, I'm going to stop sharing this screen too, so we can all look at each other. There we go. And there's my music. Hang on one second. There we go. Maybe you can hear it. I could hear my music louder suddenly. Okay. Yeah, Joel's going to do just a little background, some context for the Burnham Fellowship, and then I'll share just more of the logistics and the details about the year and kind of the next steps after this. And then we have Sam is on, and Beth and Emily, and Beth is a fellow this year, and Emily and Sam are alumni. And so just an opportunity to just do a little Q&A with them for you guys to get to hear more from participants about their experience. And then, yeah, we would love, again, to answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Joel, who's going to just do a little bit of the context and background, and then we'll come back with some of the logistics.
All right. Can you guys hear me well? Yep. Great. Okay. So as Melissa said, the point of what I'm about to do right now is kind of try to answer why Burnham. And I first wrote this talk a few years ago, essentially as an attempt to answer for myself why should I have done this before I kind of came to be convinced of this kind of the importance of this type of work. So I've been a pastor for a number of years. I went to Bible college, went to seminary, and then became a pastor. And kind of in my early years, the way that I conceived of faith and work in general was essentially a ministry that churches did when they got to a large enough size to afford it. It's like, okay, what else are we going to do? Oh, let's do work or something like that. I'm going to slap on faith and work ministry into it. So there's kind of like an add-on. Or the other way I thought of it was kind of like shoddy theology, just kind of like work principles from the Bible. So Jesus had 12 disciples, you should have 12 interns or something like that. That's clearly not really the point of what's going on there. So I didn't think of it as being that central to a church's ministry in any kind of way. This all changed for me pretty quickly when a number of years ago, I went on a day trip to New York. And we were in New York City, and I sat down with a meeting with the director of the Center for Faith and Work. It was a really short meeting, but it took about 5 minutes into the conversation when I realized I had been thinking essentially completely wrong about faith and work ministry. I'm really missing the importance of faith and work ministry. For really, rather than being a side ministry that just talks about work principles or business principles from the Bible, what faith and work ministry is truly all about, what the whole concept behind it is truly seeking to do, is to disciple people to live out the gospel in every area of their lives. Or to say it differently, what faith and work, what we are really all about, is trying to counter shape God's people to live according to the gospel. So I assume that for many of you, the purpose of your work is a little elusive. meaning that you have a hard time understanding what the ultimate God-given purpose is concerning the thing that you probably spend most of your time doing. What, according to the Bible, what, according to God, according to Jesus, is the purpose of your work? Most of us don't really know. Most of us aren't really sure. And even if we have some kind of idea, we tend to say something like, but my ultimate purpose is I work so I can evangelize my coworkers, or I work so I can give money to the church. So that the most we could really say about the ultimate purpose of our work, and so really the interaction between faith and work, is something about evangelism in the workplace, giving money through the workplace, or probably something about being ethical at the workplace. But the problem with that is that while there are flickers of truth in those ideas, they are inadequate for truly defining the purpose of your work according to the scriptures, really according to the gospel. So what those answers basically assume is that there is this dualism, kind of a split in our world between the spiritual and the material, and that the spiritual, since we believe that's what Jesus was all about. I mean, basically, anytime I'm in a Bible study and Jesus heals someone, we tend to say, Jesus did that, but what he's really about is the spiritual, or some kind of thing. We think the spiritual, since we think the spiritual is what Jesus is all about, the spiritual is better and higher. And so as a result, anything that relates to the material has to have its ultimate purpose in supporting or relating to the spiritual in some kind of way. And this is why our work then becomes either about evangelizing or giving money to the church. Because we have this idea that's almost like a knee-jerk reaction that the ultimate purpose of something has to relate to the spiritual domain, and thus work cannot be about what I produce or how I produce it. It must be about helping my coworkers make a spiritual decision for Christ, or supporting people whose jobs are about the spiritual, i.e. pastors, parachurch workers, and so on. Now, while of course, I think the church is very important, I've been a pastor for like 8 years, and I think evangelism is vital. The problem I began to see in that conversation in New York is that to isolate the purpose of our work and really our lives to be all about supporting the spiritual in some kind of way is actually to domesticate the gospel, or perhaps said better, is to minimize the gospel's massive scope. Okay, so in Ephesians 1:3, the Apostle Paul explains that God has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. Okay, that in Jesus, we've received every spiritual gift we could ever imagine, from justification to adoption to the Holy Spirit himself. But in 1:10, okay, so 7 verses later, after Paul has this litany, this list where he kind of keeps on going on and on and on with all the different things we've received through Jesus Christ, Paul explains that this spiritual blessing that we have received in Christ was part of a plan for the fullness of time to unite all things in Christ, things in heaven and things on earth. And we have to think about that for a second, because essentially what Paul is saying is that our personal spiritual salvation in Jesus Christ, while important and amazing, is part of a larger plan where all the material and the spiritual elements would be united under the reign of Jesus Christ, where the material things of the world and the spiritual things of the heavens will be brought under the rule and reign of Jesus Christ. And our salvation is simply a part of that. But that means that the gospel is not actually merely about the spiritual. It's about that, but it's about even more. It's not just about the things we cannot see. It's about every single aspect of our lives and our world coming to be restored to what they were always meant to be. So if you think about it, if all you had to define what we as humans were meant to do and be in this world is Genesis 1-2. Okay, so you were just given Genesis 1-2 and you said, this is the only thing you have. You just have this content. Define for me what a human is supposed to do. What is the purpose of their lives? What you would not define it as is being a spiritual being who has a personal relationship with God. That's just not what you would get from the very beginning of the Bible. That's not the impression you would get at all when you read about the original purpose given to us in Genesis 1-2. Instead, when you read there about what humans were created to do, what you find is that we were created to rule this world in a way that imitates God. We were to be God's presence, his image bearers in the world, meaning that just as God had created, organized, and put our world together in a way that was good and then rested from his work, we, as his image bearers, were created to do the same. That was our purpose. to work for the glory of God in this world. It wasn't about a spiritual and material split, but about us material beings working for the glory of our spiritual God who made the material good. You see, that purpose is what we believe has been restored to us through the gospel. That through the gospel, the world is being put right. So that the gospel is not merely about us material beings being saved from something. We're not just saved from the world. We are saved for the world. And that's what I feel I began to see and learn in that short conversation in New York. I began to see that while I was preaching the gospel to my people and trying to help them believe it, I had not done a good enough job of helping my people see how that gospel that saves us also gives us purpose in life that is fulfilled through the work that we do, whether it be as a CEO, an engineer, a clerk, a receptionist, or a stay-at-home parent. Through the gospel and the story of the scriptures, we are not just saved from something, but for something, which is to image or imitate our creator, organizer, delegator, restore God in the world, to look like him in all that we do. And that is what the Burnham Fellowship is all about. It was birthed out of that desire to say, how can we do a better job of really equipping our people to do these kinds of things within the church? The Burnham Fellowship is essentially about seeking to reshape each one of us to live each and every aspect of our lives in light of the story of the scriptures with the gospel as its climate. It's about diving deeply then into what the gospel truly is. Okay, really trying to, like what I just explained, how do we really get that, not just into our heads, but into our hearts? What if the gospel truly is? We want to dive deeply into that, into what Jesus' life, death, and resurrection truly accomplished for us, so that we can be reshaped to know what it means to truly live as God's child now, as we wait Jesus' glorious return. So that is what the Burnham Fellowship is all about. And I know that sounds really grand and kind of cosmic and stuff like that, but there are really specific pieces that are part of trying to help you, us all grasp that. And so Melissa is going to kind of go over the details of what is the structure and how do we put this whole thing together. So I'll hand it back over to Melissa.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. We really just kind of want to try to give you a taste of like what it is that we're going to be talking about. It's always really hard for us to describe what is the Burnham Fellowship, what are we trying to do. It comes under the Faith and Work Chicago ministry, but it's so much more than just about faith and work. It really is, as we talk about it, whole life discipleship. It's really about understanding this grand story that we talk about as the true story of the world, found in scripture and climaxing in Jesus Christ. And what does that have to do with every part of our life? So the way the curriculum is structured, I say this every time, it's a 9-month program, but really I think it's like 8 if you actually do the math. We start at the end of September and we go through almost the end of May. So I'll show you a timeline in a minute. But the structure of the program is really in like 4 parts. And I'm gonna pull up a slide here to show you, and I'll walk through some of the pieces of it. So 1 moment. Can you guys see the slide there? Okay. So can you see my cursor if I'm pointing to things? Oh, good. Okay. So the 4 parts of the curriculum really have to do with worldview and the gospel. So this is just so much of us understanding what it is, how we're shaped by our culture. We talk a lot about liturgies and yeah, just the cultural narratives that are shaping us. And then we really seek, as Joel was saying, to be reshaped by the gospel. So we spend a lot of time really understanding what is the story of scripture, and really seeking to work that out. And yeah, and get clear on what the gospel is. And then we move into 3 sections, really seeking to think about renewal. How does the gospel actually renew our own hearts? How does the gospel renew our community? And how does the gospel renew culture? And this is really more when we start talking specifically about work or different vocations. So sometimes it's a bit surprising that the work part comes in more towards the end of our Burnham year. But really it's because yeah, we want to get clear on what is the true story, because we're shaped by so many other things around us. And so then we, yeah, like I said, do this work to kind of see the gospel in every part of our lives. So kind of just thinking about the curriculum, it's a bit of the rhythm of the content throughout the course of the Burnham Fellowship. But yeah, sharing a little bit more of the time frame. So basically from now until June 1st is when applications are due on June 1st. That's the Burnham application. It's also a scholarship application. You would find that on the same website, and I'll send that out again afterwards. But you'll find the application, and then there's an application for scholarships. That's all due by June 1st. You can certainly do that before June 1st as well. In the weeks between June 1st and July 1st, that might be a follow-up, just a chance, especially if we don't know you at all, for us to get a chance just to connect with you. There is a place for a reference, I think a pastoral reference on the application, and so it might just be an opportunity for us to reach out to your reference. But that's kind of between June 1st and July 1st. But by July 1st at the latest, you'll hear back in terms of an acceptance and invitation to join next year's cohort. And then begins the summer reading. Oh, and then actually by the 15th of July is usually the deadline that we put to ask you to respond to the invitation and pay a $100 deposit on the fellowship. So yeah, just that helps us to know who we're expecting for the fall. And then there's some summer reading. There are 2 books that you read over the course of the summer. In August, we do a dessert just to get to know the new cohort. And then we kick off with a retreat at the end of September. So there are 3 retreats over the course of the Burnham year. So there's the one in January, our mid-year retreat. And then there's the one at the end of the fellowship year, which we're coming up to in just a couple of weeks. So it's always the weekend before Memorial Day is our final spring retreat. And the first retreat it's usually the last weekend in September. But before we would ask you to make a commitment to the program, we would provide you with a full calendar for the year so that you would know what those dates are and make sure that you're able to make that commitment. So yeah, the other piece is that weekly we meet for 2 hours. The cohort meets weekly. Obviously, there are some breaks in there. There's holidays and whatnot that we take breaks, but there are basically 26 modules. So 26 weeks between September and May, we meet regularly. And during those 2 hours, we spend a good 45 minutes of it praying for one another. And it really is one of the highlights of the time. There's really an emphasis placed on knowing one another and really praying for what's going on in your life, in your work, and that it's a really special part of the fellowship program. It's really easy to kind of see the sort of intellectual academic aspect of Burnham because we are reading. So there's, I put about approximately 2 hours of reading per week. It really varies by person. I think there's usually no more than about 100 pages of reading a week. And I'll show you some of those books in just a minute too. But yeah, so there's a good amount of reading during the week. We come in and we discuss that as well. But like I said, it's really an important aspect of the cohort is the time that we spend in prayer for one another during those 2 hour sessions. Let me see, what else do I want to let you know about? In terms of when that weekly cohort meeting is, so we've done 6 years now worth of Burnham. And the first year we met from 6:15 to 8:15 on Friday mornings. I think the second year, maybe we did the same. And then we started opening up Sunday afternoons as a possibility too, and found that gave more options for some people who couldn't get into the loop on a Friday morning. And so we started doing a cohort 1:30 to 3:30 approximately on Sunday afternoon. There was one year where we did both. We had enough people that were interested, and then we had enough people to run 2 cohorts. And so that is also a possibility. You'll find in the application, we actually ask that question. So it's really hard for me to tell you right now exactly when the cohort will be next year, because it's one of the questions that we ask. We want to know from everyone, you know, if we offered it only on Friday morning, would you be able to do it? If we offered it only on Sunday afternoon, would you be able to do it? So that's one of the questions that we'll ask in the application. It helps us to kind of narrow down, you know, are we going to do 1 or 2, and or which one are we going to do? Which day are we going to do? Let me show you briefly. Let's see, whoopsie. This is just a taste of the reading list. And we have, we enjoy kind of refining year after year. So this might not even be the reading list by the time next year rolls around. You read some of the books are small, you can see, so you read the whole book. Other books we just do select chapters from. Don't let it intimidate you though. These are really enjoyable readings, and what's most enjoyable is getting a chance to get together and discuss and hear a bit more teaching on them when we come together in our cohort time. I think right now we're at like 18 books or something like that are part of the fellowship program. So that's all included in the tuition, all the books, all of the retreats, all of the dinners and snacks, and all the different things that we do throughout the course of the year are included in the tuition cost. I think the last thing I want to just mention is that, yeah, again, the scholarships and application deadline are due June 1st, and they can all be found here. You probably saw the website already, and that's how you ended up here tonight. But that's all under the Burnham Fellowship. There's a lot of information there, and yeah, I'm happy to have any just one-on-one conversations or grab coffee and answer any other questions that you might have too. But I am going to pause and move to just an opportunity to hear from some of our fellows that are on the call. Yeah, just an opportunity to hear from them. And then if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you as well. But I have Sam, and then Beth and Emily are together. Would you guys mind just sharing, maybe Sam, I'll start with you and then jump to the ladies, sharing when you did the fellowship program, and then kind of what you're doing for work, what your work is.
Yeah, I did Burnham, I think 2018 to 2019, and I am currently a professor of statistics.
Excellent. And Sam is so gracious. He's one of my favorite panelists, and even though he's moved from Chicago, he jumped on the call with us tonight. So I love that. Thank you, Sam. It's always just a good opportunity to see you too.
Yeah.
Okay, Beth and Emily.
I'm Beth Lead. I'm a current fellow. Fun fact, we were independently already and so Melissa got a 2-for-1 Burnham special. But I am a physician. I'm a fellow in pediatric critical care medicine. So I take care of really sick kids.
And I'm Emily, and I am a certified prosthetist and an orthotist resident, which you guys probably don't know what that means, but I work with amputees and people with physical disabilities to make braces and legs and arms for people. I also do research in this field, and I'm going to be pursuing a PhD following this. So,
which is really,
and then
new fun big news.
Yeah.
And then Emily, you did Burnham last year, and Beth is currently a fellow with you.
Yeah, 2020 to 2021. It was an interesting year to do Burnham.
Yes, so the COVID year.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I'm just gonna throw it open to any of you that wanted to jump in. I just would love to hear what made you decide to apply for Burnham, and sort of maybe what was your process. I think that for all of you, there are different people that might relate to kind of where you were coming from, how you were processing deciding to do the fellowship.
I think for me, there were a lot of things that drew me to it. Moving to the city, I moved from Texas originally, and I've always been very interested in how faith intertwined with the workplace, and I felt like I had a really great model of someone within the workplace that lived out their faith very well, and I wanted to dive into that more and understand what it meant to represent Christ through faithful work. And I had that desire even before learning about Burnham, and so moving to the city, it was so encouraging just to know that there were already people who were pursuing this wholeheartedly, and there was a program devoted to that. And so it was pretty easy for me to be interested. I remember actually hearing about it one Sunday, and I was like, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. And it was like pretty quick for me. And yeah, it was Also huge just for community too. Moving to Chicago, I didn't know anybody in Chicago really before moving here, and so it's such a blessing getting to go deep with people that are now some of my closest friends. So yeah, that's what drew me to Burnham.
It's interesting because you were kind of starting off saying you had a good model, and I feel like I did not have a lot of Christian physicians I could look up to. I have in the more recent years, but especially early on, was involved with the standard organization for Christians in healthcare is CMDA, the Christian Medical and Dental Association. And I really struggled with what they were offering, to be honest. I think locally there were some great people involved, but it was just how I met Melissa. But nationally, a lot of what they do is pro-life legislation and not a lot else, honestly, and some medical missions. And I went on a retreat when I was in medical school where a physician who runs a federally qualified health center, so like a Lawndale type place, spoke, and he preached on the sheep and the goats. Matthew, I think, and said that if you were a physician who wasn't going into primary care in order to serve in an underserved part of an inner city or to go abroad as a missionary, preferably to a closed country, that you were a goat and you should question your salvation. And I felt really not interested in primary care and not called to that and not gifted for that. And that really threw me for a loop for a couple of weeks, and, went and had coffee with our pastor, and he was like, you don't have to accept that, right? Like, that was bad teaching. But I have wanted, I think ever since then, just to have a good answer for what does a Christian physician look like, and what does it look like to be a Christian in a field like mine that, is going to always be in a big city, in a big tower with lots of technology, right? I'm not, I take care of everybody who comes in my door, but you have to come in my door because you can't do what I do in isolation. You can't take it on a plane. You can't pop up your own clinic. You have to work in a big system. And so I wanted that kind of framework. I also always wish I went to seminary and didn't. So this was my opportunity to pretend I did that. So those were kind of the two motivating factors. And then I think the biggest hang up that I had was the time. And I think was really honest. And if you are also on this call, I had in this position, I had a good conversation with Melissa early on of best case scenario, I'm missing a third of the sessions. Is that okay? And you guys were really gracious and understanding. And so I think there is a lot of room for that. And I would say, even having had to miss a third of the sessions, it's been really, really worth it.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I'm in a job which, at least for now, I feel like God has called me into. But I do often struggle to connect my daily work with kind of what Joel was talking about earlier, the larger redemptive story of what God is doing. So I'm a statistician, right? And which seems often, if you all have taken a statistics class in college, you probably think this is quite far from God's redemptive work, right? But even in my research, right, I do a lot of things that are pretty abstract and theoretical and not tied to specific applications. And so I've always wrestled with this tension, right? And still do in many ways, right? But this question of how our faith should guide our work. And so I personally was really excited to do Burnham. And now here on the other side, a couple of years later, I'm very glad that I did. And kind of the story of how I actually got into I heard about Burnham. So similar to Emily, I had just recently moved to Chicago from Seattle the summer before I started Burnham. And I actually, I heard about Burnham actually when I was in Seattle. I was sitting in a coffee shop and kind of overheard a conversation of another pastor who was kind of sitting at the end of the table and talking about this program that they did in Seattle, and in terms of connecting faith and work, and kind of my ears popped up. And he said, well, you know, this is a program that happens all around the country in places like New York City and Chicago. And so I heard that, and then I kind of quickly Googled it and found out about Burnham. And so, yeah, ended up applying and just have found so much value and yeah, just so much richness in the program.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I was thinking I should also say that I said at the beginning, but that the fellowship program draws from all across the city. So not just primarily from one church context. As well, it runs a very wide span of ages and vocations. So we've had people who are recent college graduates all the way through retirees do the program, and it's so valuable to just have a wide range of work experience and like I said, just different. Yeah, we've had stay-at-home parents who have also done the program, and we like to really emphasize that we are talking about work, and that we all work, no matter what that 9 to 5 is, and whether you get paid for it or not. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make that distinction as well. Even as you hear from two people in the medical field and in academia, we do draw from a wide range of vocations as well. Let me ask a question. I'm gonna put 2 questions together, so feel free to answer however you like. Something that you enjoyed or are enjoying currently about the fellowship, and maybe something that surprised you that you didn't expect from doing the program, or that would be part of the program.
I can answer this one. For me, these are kind of somewhat intertwined. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the fellowship was exactly what Melissa just mentioned. There is such a wide variety of different people who take who participate in the program. So personally, I did not go to HTC. Still don't go to HTC. But yeah, and you see people from churches all over Chicago, and every different denominations, life stages, vocations, all of these like different types of things. And I think so much of Burnham is kind of confronting your existing worldview, and kind of showing you which parts are kind of maybe specific to you, and which parts maybe should be, which parts are out of line with the gospel, and kind of how to think about this. And so I think there's a real value in coming to this with people with lots of backgrounds, and kind of different experiences. And so that was something that I just really did enjoy. Like we had, yeah, people from all sorts of different churches who had very different opinions about a lot of the things that we discussed. And I think that was, yeah, just really fun for me. And I think something that surprised me kind of on the same vein was like, just how, you know, we know that we are shaped by our experiences, right? This is something that we just naturally know. But I think when you really kind of do some of the deep dives that we did in Burnham, you kind of realize how much of your worldview is shaped by your particular kind of microculture, right? So if you had a professor and you thought like, wow, these people are really weird, right? Like they're not like yes, that's exactly true, right? Like so much of the way that I think about the world is shaped by the microculture that I lived in. Or live in. And yeah, I don't think I would have necessarily said that same thing before taking Burnham. And I think really kind of peeling back a lot of the layers on this, and seeing kind of, well, what are the things that you believe and kind of think about? What are actually gospel things, and what are things that are kind of shaped by your culture?
Yeah, I think for me, I was like, I'm trying to think of most surprised by like how it shifted my perspective, even just in my day-to-day, I think, of work. And I really was encouraged just like by understanding how all aspects of our work really can and are intended to glorify God through the work itself, and that's good. And that was so counterintuitive to what I had, I think, grown up understanding. Like if I'm similar to how Joel mentioned earlier, if I'm in the workplace, it's to evangelize my coworkers, and that's my goal. And that's like not, it's so much deeper than that. And that even just good, faithful work, it glorifies God and it pushes back against the darkness. That's good. And that's so enriching. That was such a refreshing shift for me. And I think what I enjoyed, I think what's been most long-term impactful for me was like the prayer groups that we had. It's like I still meet with my prayer group, which is really sweet. And it's been a blessing that I think that like there's a large group of prayer that we have as a Burnham cohort, which Melissa referred to it within the 2-hour meetings. But within that, there were, at least in my cohort, there were smaller prayer groups. And that was just an opportunity to really grow deep with a few people and really, bear burdens alongside one another. It came at a really interesting time with COVID for me. And I think in some ways that just caused us to go even deeper. So that was something I didn't know I was going to get out of it either. And that was it is so sweet still. So that was so impactful for me.
Yeah, all of that really resonates. I think, one of my favorite / surprising parts has been the people and just the richness of the relationships, especially just like a group that I remember looking around the room when we first met and being like, this is kind of a motley crew. Like this kind of, it feels a little random. Okay, like let's see what happens. And now it feels very much like a group that has an identity and that has a real ethos to it that I just adore. So I think that has been one. I think the other has been I had a lot of sort of intellectual and theological, like church education, I guess you could say. And one of the things that Burnham really did, we really traced that story of the world of like creation, fall, redemption, and glorification. And I could have told you that story arc, but I think the majority of what I've always been taught has really focused on that like fall and redemption. The richness that Burnham has given me has been to kind of what Joel was talking about at the beginning of like really flesh out and lean into like, what does it mean that we're created beings, that we were created for a garden, that we were put somewhere and given work to do, and had a task given to us, and what does it mean that the world will be made right again in a physical way? And like those two bookends of the story, I think, were really anemic in my previous understanding of the gospel and of the world that God has made. And I think Burnham has given me just a real sense of both of those two pieces of the story in a way that has just really deepened my worship and my love for the gospel.
Thanks so much, you guys. And yeah, just to say a little bit more too about Emily was mentioning the prayer groups, and it's one of my favorite things I hear for over the past 6 years is groups just continue still to be connected and to meet. There's somebody was saying yesterday, I think this is really true, that so often we know our work friends really well in one context, and we know our Christian church friends really well in another context, but this is sort of a really beautiful way that we get to know people on a much more fully orbed way. We get to have those worlds kind of brought together and really get to know one another and be known in both our work and in our faith life. But yeah, the smaller we groups, kind of prayer triads that we do, end up being really special as well. I'm going to pause